Well, that was a introduction that I don't think I deserved. Thank you, Eric. So let me allay all those concerns that you think you might learn something here today. I'm going to very quickly take you all through a presentation on how the climate is likely to affect both the aquatic and the terrestrial ecosystems. First, let me say that I am a fisheries biologist by training. And so you're going to hear most of the stories as they relate to stuff that happens under the surface of the water. There's a theme to the presentation, and I think it relates both to aquatic and terrestrial systems, and so hopefully that is what you will take away from this presentation. Thanks, Carrie, for setting things up so well. Invasive species are a big deal, and I have a little bit of experience with the Klamath, and that's why this hairline is receding so much. Anyhow, it's a great pleasure to be here with y'all this morning. As Dr. Moat mentioned earlier, I think we're experiencing the endless summer here in the Rogue Valley. It might be Oregon-wide. High temperatures Thursday back in the 90s. And we'll have fall on Saturday and then back into the 90s on Sunday. I'm going to share with you. I've been telling around the basin since that report that Carrie mentioned earlier that was written in part by the Russian team for conservation in Southern Oregon, the National Center for Conservation Science and Policy, NCCSP. They figured out that that was not a very marketable name, and so they changed to the GEOS Institute. I left that post on December 31st of last year, but this presentation really owes itself to work that I and my colleagues were doing at GEOS. Okay, here we go. So the official title is Climate Effects to the Ecology of the Rogue Basin. I like to call this presentation Bidet, Bouillabaisse, Bidet, mostly because I like saying Bouillabaisse. But again, fisheries biologist, I think in terms of hydrology, I think the hydrology of the system as it relates to precipitation drives ecological patterns in a large part of what we're seeing in the terrestrial ecosystem as well. We're going to get a lot of water in a relatively short period of time. And then, if you could imagine, drier August in the Rogue Basin, that's what we're up for, right? Just to set the stage a little bit, you're looking at a river basin that's a little bit over 3 million acres in size. Most of it is very mountainous. It historically had lots of forests. The lowlands is where the agriculture and the modest urbanization that we have in Southern Oregon take place. It also happens to be those parts of the river basin when salmon, prior to those developments, really made their heyday. And a lot of those streams now don't support salmon numbers, at least in the same levels that they did before. But so where you see yellow, red, and brown is where agriculture happens, it's where people live, it's where salmon want to be. But the region is home to an incredible amount of biodiversity, and much of that is terrestrial. Fully 2/3 of the basin is in what is known as the Klamath-Siskiyou ecoregion. Klamath-Siskiyou ecoregion. Well known for incredible diversity of plants, in particular coniferous trees especially, but also lots of other little things, a lot of invertebrates. There's a really high density of salamanders in the area, lots of bugs. It's a spectacular place. We have really rich forests. As you move up towards the Crater Lake area, you get into the high Cascades. It's a lot more productive forest habitat, a lot less diverse than the western 2/3 of the basin. Highly dissected terrain, very mountainous. There's a big precipitation gradient as you go west to east, but all of the dissection in the terrain, the interesting soils that you find, and that precipitation gradient and temperature gradient allows for lots of microclimates where these ice age relics like brewer spruce hang out. It's one of the reasons why we have such a diversity in our plants. So we're internationally known for that. We're also internationally known for our fish runs. People come from all over the world to try to catch steelhead this time of year in the Rogue Basin, and summer steelhead in the Rogue Basin are usually pretty willing to take a fly and help people knock that off their list. It's We have tremendous fish runs in the basin. There are 8 species of fish in the Rogue that live part-time in freshwater and go to the ocean to get big and come back to freshwater. Climate affects all of these things. In fact, it is the climate that helps drive the ecological diversity in the basin, and all of these critters rely on climate cues or climate patterns in some way or another so that they can thrive or at the very least persist. Invasive species are a big deal. They're gonna play a really important role in the ecology moving forward. I'm not gonna talk so much about that. In fact, the presentations leading up to this presentation have done a really great job of setting forth some of the patterns that you're gonna hear me talk about in a lot of the graphs that I'll show you will have seen before. That's okay. By the end of this day, you'll know that stuff rote. The big theme that I wanna touch on is really what ecology is all about, and that is that most of these systems rely on patterns that have been established for a long period of time, things that happen in a particular order in order for other creatures or plants to take advantage of those conditions and survive to make babies, right? That's what ecology is. And what shifting climate conditions are going to do to these patterns is disrupt them. And you're going to get things that should be happening synchronously, that animals rely on happening synchronously, start not happening synchronously. And there are dire ramifications to that. I like to explain it, and it might not be a great analogy, but I like to explain it like you ever take an engine apart and then put it back together and look down and there are a couple screws and a spring on the floor. They might not have been very important, or they might have been critically important, and we don't know. Ecologists are people that like to measure things that aren't very easily measurable, and so we talk in broad brushstrokes a lot. Don't let any broad brushstrokes that I'm talking about today dissuade you. Things are going to shift. There's going to be a reaction. The Earth doesn't care. We probably do. So thinking about that, when do flowers bloom, and when do the pollinators that help those flowers with their life cycle show up to do the pollination? If those things don't happen at the same time, the butterfly goes without food and the plant goes without reproduction. Bugs hatch. Flycatchers show up from Central America. They better happen at about the same time, or the flycatcher, well, this isn't a flycatcher, but for the birders out there, the sparrow, whatever, isn't going to be able to make it to its breeding grounds further north. I just had to show a picture of a vernal pool. I don't know that very many people care a whole lot, but we have a lot of vernal pools in the Rogue Basin in and around the Agate Desert area around Medford. And again, the time of the year when the water is contained within those pools and the time of the year when it's warm enough for the plants that rely on those same habitats to germinate could be important. And of course, we've got the listed fairy shrimp species that takes advantage of these habitats as well. Diving into my particular specialty, if I have one, thinking about anadromous fish. Anadromous fish, they go to the ocean to get big, they come back to freshwater to spawn. Some of the anadromous fish that live in the basin spend a full year in freshwater before they migrate out to the ocean, but there are some patterns that are important here. The colors, if you can see them across the table, they're a little tough to see. All the way to the left there, you've got a purplish color that starts sort of in the middle of December and persists into the middle of March. That's winter, and that's when we have the most species of fish, anadromous fish at least, spawning in the basin. Another thing I'd like to draw your attention to, this table will show up again a little later, just sort of bookmark this idea. The blue oval down there, that's the spring runoff period from middle of March into the early part of July, and that's when we have lots of juvenile salmonids, lamprey, and other critters that outmigrate in force. they're all headed to the ocean during that period of the year. And again, that's when the rains start, under the historic climate conditions, rain started picking up, snow started melting. There was a big flush of water helping those critters make their way downstream. All right, here we go. This should be a story that you have down by heart at this point. Changes in precipitation, we're just going to look at the month of February here in the basin, looking roughly mid-21st century there in the top set of tiles, late 21st century in the bottom set of tiles. Things, looks like the change in precipitation is not dramatic, maybe a little bit wetter out towards the coast. Generally, things stay pretty similar. What happens to, and possibly in some places a little bit wetter, but what happens to temperature in that same month? Well, things get warmer again, supporting a story that you've heard earlier today. Precipitation might not change a whole lot, but we're going to see a lot more of it as rain, a lot less of it sticking to the side of the hill. Storms, heavy precipitation events. Thinking about elevation class in the basin and looking at the amount of the Rogue Basin that's in an elevation class that's somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 meters. This is the transient snow zone. It drives the hydrology of our basin. A lot of watersheds have high proportions of this transient snow zone, which is going to turn into rain zone moving forward, given the projections in temperature and precipitation patterns. Snowpack trends, Dr. Moat showed us this earlier. It's mostly bad news for Southwest Oregon. Again, the amount of wet stuff falling out of the sky may not change a whole lot. It's just going to come as rain. It's going to run to the hill, and it's going to do things to our rivers that were accustomed to happening, but maybe not nearly as frequently. Could be a good time to invest in sandbags. Moving to another time of the year, now we're looking at August. This is a time, again, thinking about rivers. We're looking at base flow conditions. Precipitation, well, it's already awfully dry in August. I guess the models suggest that things are going to get drier yet. Again, temperature, it's going to get warmer. Ryan, Redding is, I think, about right. Things are going to get warmer. A warmer August in the Rogue Basin doesn't strike me as being that palatable, but it's going to get warmer in Redding too. So what does this mean? Again, for thinking about rivers, we're going to have a lot more stream gauges maybe looking like this. Base flow conditions will be lower. Have rivers with this haze from the fires that may be more frequent. But also low conditions. It could drive this sort of situation. There's a really healthy debate going on right now amongst ecologists about are these trends in forest fires just returning to a more normal pattern? And that's a great argument to have. Of course, we've got a lot of communities in and around the basin that we're worried about exposing to greater levels of fire. And it's not so much that the fires are going to happen. I think we have a lot of forests in the basin that are adapted to these sorts of conditions. The rub is what grows back. Is it going to be the same trees that grow back in the future, or is it going to be something slightly different? And I think that models what we're thinking. The thinking that goes into that argument is that a lot of our mixed conifer forests may come back as more of a broadleaf forest. We're going to see the mixed conifer zone moving up in elevation, and so forest conditions are going to shift. If you're a birder, you know that there are certain species that you tend to find in mixed conifer forests and others that you find in Douglas fir conifer forests, and different birds still that you would find in an oak woodland sort of situation. And that's not just birds, that's lots of different critters. As the change agent of fire takes hold, we're keenly interested in what plants grow back. And as several other presenters earlier mentioned, there's opportunities for diseases or insects that may cause another change agent in forests. Large swaths of forests are affected by, let's say, beetles, bark beetles. Again, it's not so much that this happens, change happens, and the ecological systems are very attuned to being able to come back from these situations. But in the shifting conditions that we have from climate, we're worried about what grows back and what that means for the animals that relied on what was there before. And that's the bouilla base. That's the fish stew part of this. Low water, warm fish, hopefully not quite warm enough to be cooking temperature, and then we're back into the bidet situation with another flush of water in the winter. So I want to bring this back to, again, thinking about fish, but you can insert a group of critters that is near and dear to your heart. I don't know that the situation necessarily changes that much. We're going to go from a situation depicted by the black line there, the historical type of hydrograph, the way that water comes through our rivers when there are peaks and when there are troughs under the climate situation that we're coming out of, right? So we get a peak in the spring. There's a base flow period that's, July, August, September, and October. Things start picking up again. Flows are pretty stable. We have snow in the mountains that we switch over to rain, and the snow starts melting, and we get that peak again. So this is what we're used to. This is what the anadromous fish in the basin are used to. These are the precipitation patterns that drive lots of other ecological systems in the basin. And we're going to shift to something that looks a little more like the red dashed line here. And again, we saw this graph earlier, but where the highest flows are happening during the time of the year when most of the salmon are spawning in the basin, and flows are decreasing at the time of the year when the juvenile salmonids are jumping on their surfboards and surfing from Shady Cove down to Gold Beach. This is a really disastrous thing when you're thinking about anadromous fish and the way that they time their life histories. The way that the hydrology in the basin is shaping up runs exactly counter to the way that they need the water situation to be in the river systems to be successful. So back to this table again. The time of the year when spawning is happening looks more like the conditions that happen during what is now the out-migration period with the projected climate trend. The time of the year when juvenile salmonids are migrating out of the system looks more like the time of the year when we only have juvenile fish rearing in the basin. So not sure that this is going to work very well for Chinook, coho, steelhead, or lamprey, or green sturgeon. So what can we do about it? Well, that's what tomorrow's for, right? And I guess maybe what separates what I've been talking about for the past 15 or 20 minutes is different from some of the other presentations that we've had leading up to this, in that ecology is sort of inherently non-manageable. I mean, some of these other things we can manage our way out of it. I'm not sure with ecology we have a whole lot of hope there. We can certainly think really carefully about how we manage those other systems and try to make a little space for the ecological systems in the basin so that, as Eric described eloquently earlier, ecology doesn't finish a close last. But leaving aside the issue of mitigation, I think something that's really important is making sure that we have contiguous paths of habitat for fish to be able to move and migrate. Fish, insects, birds, plants migrate too. It just takes generations, right? We need to be thinking at those timescales, and we need to be thinking about contiguous paths. Make migration and movement easy. We need to recover extensive wetland areas, floodplain habitats, off-channel habitats along streams. I think that's something that we can do to help mitigate that fast runoff, at least to some extent. And then this has been hit upon in a couple of presentations earlier. I think maybe Dr. Jones was the first to bring it up. Maintain diversity and spread the risk. I think it's going to be important. We don't think about focusing in on small sections of the river basin as places where we want to protect areas. We need to be thinking really broadly about big swaths of area in lots of different places. So I think with that, I'll bring things to a close. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to a great conference. Thank you.